Welcome everyone to our fourth and final session of our Ecological Immersion Academy on the rights of nature. Over the past few weeks, we've heard from experts on topics including our overview of the rights of nature, animal rights, and ecosystem rights. And today we're going to round out our understanding of this complex legal theory with a discussion of environmental justice, or the human rights component of our general rights of nature approach. So we're so thrilled to have with us Professor Nadia Ahmad, who's going to guide us through this final component of our academy. Just a little bit of logistical information before we get started. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat and we will share them with Professor Ahmad during the discussion portion of the program. But we will also be opening up the floor at that point as well. So if you would rather ask your question or make your comment directly, you will have the opportunity to do that as well. But if you'd rather have us present it, just pop it in the chat for us. So with that, let me introduce Professor Ahmad. So Professor Ahmad is an assistant professor at Barry University School of Law, so you should recognize her. Her research explores the intersections of energy siting, the environment, and sustainable development, and it draws on international investment law and corporate social responsibility. She's published over 20 scholarly articles, book chapters, and reviews. She currently serves as the chair of the ABA's Environmental Justice Committee, chair of the Younger Comparativist Committee's Linkages and Engagement Advisory Group of the American Society of Comparative Law, and regional chair of the Mid-Florida for the Florida Muslims Bar Association. She previously was chair of the Florida Bar's Media and Communications Law Committee and a board member of the City and County of Denver's Human Rights and Community Partnership Advisory Board. She's also a member of the Center for Earth Jurisprudence's advisory board, and she serves as the coordinator for the Environmental and Earth Law Certificate Program. So we're in very good hands today to get a general understanding of the issues that arise under this topic of environmental justice. And we've noticed that throughout our discussions in each week. Every time we were discussing one of the other components, we inevitably hit into some sort of environmental justice issue. And so with our discussion today, we're really going to get a better understanding of how all these components work together and how we can realize this general idea of the rights of nature. So without further ado, please help me welcome Professor Ahmad.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. I think it's really great to be here. I think it's really exciting to share this information in this space with you. And one of the things I wanted to just tell you, so that I tell my students also, is so my career path, I think it followed the trajectory of Shaquille O'Neal and Tim Tebow geographically, because I started off in Florida when Shaquille O'Neal was playing for the Magic, and then I went off to California for college when he was playing for the Lakers. And then I came back to Florida for law school when he was playing for the Miami Heat. Then my career path followed that of Tim Tebow when he went from Gainesville. Then he went to Denver where I worked. And then he went and played for the New York Jets, and I worked at Pace Law School in White Plains, which is nearby. And then I came back to Florida. And so I think one of the things I wanted to share is, like, you never know, a kind of like just to be open to different possibilities in terms of what you want to do in law school. Because when I was in law school, I focused more on international law, but when I went into practice and focused on land use and property, I found like I really, and also estate planning, I saw a lot of my clients were just in environmental issues as well. And so, being in Florida, I recognize, and as someone who cared deeply about the environment, I didn't know that you could really make a profession out of environmental law or even environmental justice. And so I would really encourage you to, if those of you are really interested, and I know some of you are, to make sure that you follow your passion in terms of what you want to do. And so one of the ways for me to really to follow my inclinations towards social justice issues was to really, like, what you're doing now is to just hunker down and go to law school. And it wasn't like your conditions where I was facing a number of hurricanes in 2004, but you're actually facing a number of issues, including this pandemic. And does anybody know what today is, like what it marks the anniversary of? Any guesses? You can type in the chat. So we're actually 1 month away from the end of hurricane season. October 30th is 1 month until the end, until November 30th is when hurricane season will end. So we're still in the middle of hurricane season. And so I think it's important to see that that these issues we face, it's not just you face environmental toxins and pollutions, but you're also facing the threat of natural disasters as well. And so I practiced law in Florida for a few years, focusing on land use, zoning, property, business and corporate law, as well as insurance litigation, bad faith insurance litigation defense. And when I was in law school, one of my professors told me that he wanted to do international law, and it took him about 5 years from after he graduated law school to be able to find a career in international law. And so even for you, like, you may not, your first thing is to find a job as soon as you graduate, but then also to focus on finding something that you're passionate about. And so for me, what I ended up doing is I went to do a master's program in environmental and natural resources law at the University of Denver. And so while I was there, I became involved with climate change litigation work, and those were known as the Hatch cases for what would become the Juliana case. And so in 2001, I worked on those Hatch cases doing research while I was returned to being a student. And so the total number of climate change litigation cases in the US around that time has exceeded more than the rest of the world combined. So for example, in 2013, there was 420 climate change lawsuits in the United States versus 173 in the rest of the world. And so this idea of climate change wasn't something that was envisioned at the time the Constitution was created, but what you did see is that the framers of the Constitution recognized that each generation's fundamental obligations to preserve the value and integrity of natural resources for later generations. And so this was something that it's not just a concept that was emerged during the Constitution. It's an old Roman concept that also has older links as well. And so the most succinct systematic treatment of intergenerational principles was provided by Thomas Jefferson to James Madison when he said, "The question whether one generation of men has the right to bind another is a question of such consequence as not to merit a decision, but place among the fundamental principles of every government set out on this ground, which I suppose to be self-evident, that the earth belongs in usufruct to the living." So when I went back to law school, I actually enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy law school when I was in law school the first time, but I think I enjoyed it because I'd been working for a few years. And so while I was preparing for the Colorado bar exam, I had taken the Florida bar and passed it. And so I decided I'm going to, I don't know what I'm going to do next. So I took the Colorado bar exam, and I worked for an NGO at the time. And the NGO company, Sustainable Development Strategies Group, and some of you who were in my environmental law class, we also we met the executive director of that, Christy Disney Bruckner, and she's actually looking for anybody who's interested in interning as well with them again. And so the work that they do is they work on sustainable practices, whether it's for mining companies or even for other types of energy projects. And those programs are doing work through the World Bank and other international aid agencies. And so then after that, after I took the bar and passed it, I was, before I think I took the bar, and then I was waiting for my results, but I wasn't ready to work right away because I had a little kid. So then I was working in the career services at the time, And so my boss told me that there's going to be an on-campus recruiting fair. You should go to that. And so I went to that and ended up getting recruited to go work on campus for a multinational oil and gas company. And what I did there was focus on post-production royalty issues for landowners and consortium partners. And so what that did is gave me a behind-the-scenes view of what it's like to work in the oil and gas sector. And so even though I enjoyed the challenges of my job, I also wanted to be a law professor at the same time. And so while I was doing that, I also started doing pro bono research at Columbia University Center for Sustainable Investment remotely. And when I was there, I would also advise foreign companies in terms of creating sustainable business practices for the extractive industries. And so some of that work would involve getting up at 6 a.m. to do Skype calls with Afghanistan, Israel, and Australia. And at the same time, while I was doing this, also serving on the board of the City and County of Denver's Human Rights and Community Services Advisory Board. And so having these types of different community relations and volunteer opportunities allowed me to network to do the work that I wanted to do. And so one of the things that I want to share with you is it's really important that you be the one who be able to decide your own destiny. And Dr. Martin Luther King, kind of pivoting back to the topic of our discussion today, is that Dr. Martin Luther King paved the way for environmental regulations. And I think he doesn't get the credit for that, particularly for urban environments that have been populated or discriminated or have include neglected groups. So within a few years of his 1963 I Have a Dream speech, environmental defenders succeeded in pressuring the government to push through important legislation such as the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act. And so for Dr. King, basic civil rights went well beyond freedom, equality, and the end of racial segregation. He also was really adamant about environmental justice, that everyone has a right to clean air, water, and soil, as well as a right to live in a healthy and nurturing natural environments. He believed that having natural parks and recreation facilities, as well as schools and education and democratic decision-making processes, were all part of a larger decision-making processes and all part of the bigger civil rights issues. And as a part of that, in essence, what he was arguing is that the fair treatment of a person's environment is tantamount to fair and equal treatment of the person themselves. And again, Dr. Martin Luther King said in his 1967 Christmas sermon, he said, "It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable reality of mutuality tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are made to live together because of the interrelated structure of reality." And so this recognition of interrelated reality is really what also motivates the work for environmental justice. And so also for me personally, it was about confronting like gender and racial biases. Was really a three-front battle that had to be waged simultaneously. I had to struggle, as a minority woman in the public sphere, as well as a woman who wouldn't accept the status quo within my own community, and also confront my own personal inhibitions that I would have. And so for me, learning about race and understanding the way it operates in society was really crucial to understanding what is happening in terms of the racial divide. And so environmental justice is really, at the end of the day, the marriage between civil rights and environmental rights. And that's really, I think, how a good way to look at environmental justice. It's really combining both civil rights and environmental rights. Former Attorney General Eric Holder had said that the United Nations is a nation of cowards when it comes to discussing race with each other, and the failure to talk about race in any sphere, whether it's from family life throughout school or culminating in the law school curriculum, really perpetuates the racial separation that we still encounter. And so I think it's important to kind of see how all of this really relates together in terms of the work that we are doing. And so I wanted to share with you some slides, very basic ones. Is it possible that I can share my screen? That's okay. We can figure out a little bit. But the next thing that I wanted to kind of think about is that the purpose of law school is really an instructive one. And so what you really also want to be able to see is that with environmental law is that um, you're really creating a place to challenge corporate law as well. So not only is environmental law looking at administrative law issues, but it's also a way to challenge the corporation. But now I think there's some folks that are saying that that the law of the corporation is now becoming environmental law. So to favor big businesses and to favor companies, environmental law is actually, there's a lot of deregulation that is happening in environmental law, not just recently, but I think over time, like over a series of decades. And so that lowers the efficacy of environmental law. And so, you know, because of that, I think it's really important to see like what are the ways that we can combat this. And so while we are really looking at different ways to think about this, to really be effective in this, I think it's important to think about how you have environmental law also is working in terms of the way it's structured and created to further transnational interests. And so these transnational corporate interests are going to supersede the transnational environmental interests that will emerge. And as a part of that discussion, what we should also note is that that there's a certain level of linkages that occur. And so for me, in some of the research that I have touched upon, I looked at recently in a paper looking at the coloniality of environmental justice. And these are some gruesome pictures, but I think it's important to really see what is happening. And so I looked at the configurations in Puerto Rico, Pakistan, and the Philippines, which have all been constantly struck by different types of natural disasters. They also have a number of environmental imbalances that are achieved because of, that have been created because of various conditions, as well as issues relating to colonial domination. And so also I think it's clear that environmental justice is also somewhat of a continuation of socio-legal apparatuses to strip individuals and communities of their basic environmental rights, especially when their basic human dignity is going to be denied. Environmental justice at its core assumes caste-like hierarchies and attempts to offer a rights-based approach to providing environmental and civil rights to minority, low-income, and indigenous communities. And so when you have entire populations that are in the way of these transnational interests, and especially when they are like the entire population is communities of colors, it makes this issue of environmental justice even more problematized. And so I wanted to kind of step back with you and look at what are the origins of environmental justice. And so kind of going back to see where exactly environmental justice emerged and what the beginning part of it was in 1982. You had the poor predominantly and African American community of Warren County, North Carolina. And the state government at the time had decided that Warren County would be the ideal location for 6,000 truckloads of soil laced with toxic polychlorinated biphenyl, known as PCBs. And so these are really important in terms of looking at the carcinogenic natures of these chemicals and the toxicity that they contain to both human health and the environment, also how they can lead to endocrine disruption and neurotoxicity. Margaret Stewart, the executive director of CEJ, has done extensive research on other types of chemicals, including these ones, and why it's so important to have regulation to protect humans as well as the environment from these toxic chemicals. And so the concept of environmental justice has really been present. It didn't just start happening in 1982 when Warren County protests started to occurring, and this was really people laying down their lives for this this issue, they would just lie down in front of the dump trucks in terms of what was happening. And so the concept is really been there. And so anytime you have had low-income people, communities of color, indigenous groups from ancient times to the height of the transatlantic slave trade to the transmodern era of current global regimes, you see that there's this ongoing colonial enterprise or transcolonial enterprise to subdue and denigrate populations, to advance commercial endeavors at the expense of beleaguered and marginalized classes, as well as groups within society. And so Peruvian sociologist Annabel Quijano, who passed away last May, had stated that the model of power that is colonially hegemonic today presupposes elements of coloniality. And so he argued that the theoretical framework which he uses of this idea of the coloniality of power was used to show the disparity of wealth, labor, and resources. And in his analysis, it was really instructive for the reformulation of environmental justice. And I think that he really provided, I think, some framework that we could benefit from in terms of learning about, especially for showing that it's instructive to understanding environmental justice. He also expressed that colonialism carried the convergence of two axes of powers. And the first one was the codification of the differences between the conquerors and the idea of race, that there was a supposedly different biological structure that placed some in a natural position of inferiority to others. And the other idea was the new structure of the control of labor and its resources and products. And so what's really important to think about is that prior to the colonization of America, the concept of race as we now know it didn't exist. And it also didn't exist because race would also become the modality in which to be able to grant legitimacy to the relations of domination imposed by the conquest itself. And at the point of you have the conquest of America, it led to the point where race would now emerge as a position to set forward ranks, places, and roles in the new society structure of power. And so once this idea of race being used as a means of subordination began to be accepted, then the next level of subordination was environmental subordination. And so this was where you have the rights of nature being trampled upon. And so the races which were considered inferior to those who were Anglo-American, as well as those who were from the lower classes, and even including for women, were not allowed the same level of environmental protection as those who faced higher environmental threats on account of displacement, disease, slavery, and migration. And as a part of this calculus, land ownership was really important in terms of seeing who had environmental rights and who did not. And so this control of labor, as well as the protection of these systems of production, would also create a society that had hierarchies that were based off of race. And Quijano really laid out the Eurocentrification of world capitalism, where he said that the privileged positions conquered by the dominant white for the control of gold, silver, and other commodities produced by the unpaid labor of Indians, blacks, and mestizos, coupled with an advantageous location in the slope of the Atlantic through which necessarily the traffic of these commodities in the world market had to pass, granted whites a decisive advantage to compete for the control of the worldwide commercial traffic. And so seeing that the origins of race are rooted in the origins of the history of the American colonial enterprise just shows you the lineage of environmental justice. And so when we look at environmental justice and just start looking at it from the discussion of Warren County, North Carolina, it also overlooks centuries of environmental denigration, pollution, toxicity in communities. And it also shows that the burden of the capital enterprise through the loss of those who have lost their lands, livelihoods, and lives, while the elite have really benefited from their toils. And we see that going forward today. And so the environmental disparities, and there was the demarcation of the Christopher Columbus Day this month, but Christopher Columbus's maiden voyage, some of like what had happened since then, like since Christopher Columbus, since that point in 1492 onwards, like what were the problems that we faced as a society? What was the environmental damage that occurred? It's hard to go back and trace what that environmental damage is and what was done, but I think it's important to see that there should be a recognition that environmental justice placed a burden on already marginalized communities to reassert their basic human dignity in the form later on of environmental permitting processes and this modern context. And so then I wanted to, discuss, kind of touch upon what happened during Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria was quite an epic natural disaster, but there was portions of it that were man-made. And some of there's issues of poor infrastructure, poor governance, and all of that combined together to create conditions that were ripe for people not being able to have access to basic issues of environmental rights. And so as a part of not environment, but just basic human rights as well, like not having access to food, clothing, shelter, all of that was combined together. And so with Hurricane Maria, as well as Hurricane Irma, which went through Central Florida. And actually, this photo here on the right side in the shelter is actually from our, I think, people who were evacuated from Hurricane Maria, and also those that were evacuated from other hurricanes in the Florida area. And so you're starting to see that there was quite a bit of problems that emerged. The first of those was the economic inequality. So who is able to evacuate, who is able to stay in place? So for example, when Hurricane Matthew in 2016 came through Florida, those who were in a really posh area of Ponte Vedra Beach were told to evacuate. I mean, they were told that they need to leave their homes, take all their belongings that they need, and they need to evacuate, especially in low-lying areas. Whereas for those who were in for those who were in downtown Jacksonville area, which is nearby, the mayor told them that they need to just hunker down. And so I think this type of differences in terms of how people can evacuate, having capital to leave, whether it's to take a bus ride or to have fuel for a vehicle or have money for hotels and to stay elsewhere, as well as being able to leave their job for an extended period of time, would also exacerbate this. And so this also goes into like the bigger picture of what is environmental justice. And so that also sees like you had evacuation shelters and routes, and so like which roads were open, which were closed, like which were clogged. And so also another thing that happened in Polk County is the sheriff's office was saying that if you're going to take shelter in one of our facilities, you need to provide a government issued IDs. And so this was also a way to crack down on those who were undocumented and to not provide a shelter and basic human necessities to them, including shelter, food, and access to water. The other level in inequality that emerged during this hurricanes was the property insurance. And so even people who had property insurance and suffered property damage as a result of this, they also experienced, they had to fight the insurance companies. And many times the insurance companies would deny their claims. And many people also learned out that they had really high, which they should have already known, but I think they may not have read the fine print as clearly, is that they had very high deductibles for what had happened during hurricane, what had happened during the hurricane. So if you have property insurance that is covered damage that occurs due to a hurricane, you're going to have a different premium, a different premium as well that will happen. And so being able to see that, I think, is important to see what happens. And so I remember I was working with some students to provide it was natural disaster legal services through the ABA and through FEMA. And what we learned is, went down to the FEMA office, and we also tried to work with FEMA. And one of the biggest problems that people faced is that they actually had damage from previous hurricanes, including roof damage, which the insurance company haven't covered and fixed before. So then when the roof was damaged again by the more recent hurricane Irma, the insurance company was denying the coverage again, because the insurance company would say that this is from damage that happened from a previous hurricane. And so the person would say, you never satisfied my claim then, and then it's really a problem. And this is really where it's important for lawyers to step in and help out in these situations. And so the ABA has, I think, done a tremendous job, but I think there has to be, in terms of being able to provide free legal services for those who are impacted by these natural disasters. But the problem is this information has to get out. Not a lot of people are aware of this. Even at the local FEMA offices that I went down to, close to John Young Parkway and Lee Road, and it was basically being operated out of an old bank building. The FEMA officials on the ground didn't know about the ABA legal services to help people, because people also have to be applying for FEMA assistance. And when folks that were impacted applied for FEMA assistance, the claims would also be denied, and they would have to be resubmitted and go through an appeal process, and that would also have to be done in a very timely manner. And so even if government assistance is available, it's not going to be accessible to everyone. And so you saw the same thing happening with the pandemic. So you would see these large multi-billion dollar corporations being able to really access the relief right away in terms of pandemic coronavirus relief, and then those who were working on minimum wage and really needed to live paycheck by paycheck were really stuck in the system of unemployment compensation for weeks or months, and not able to receive any means to which to live. And so then what would also happen is that you had an influx of people. I remember actually, because we were doing another webinar then through the ABA on focusing on Hurricane Maria, and one of our guest speakers, he actually had to evacuate the island of Puerto Rico. And as we were talking to him during our webinar time, he was actually signing a lease with an apartment company because he needed to move his family there. And so he's talking to us from the business office of the apartment he had just leased like a few months ago. But not everybody would be able to find an apartment, because they had to provide proof of income. They had to provide all these other types of different assurances to rent. And so as students, like the hurdles are that you have to even to go through to sign a lease. And so these are people that are having to kind of evacuate and leave everything behind. And so I think these are issues as well that also relate to environmental injustice. And then also people were facing medical bills as well, those who were injured as a result of the hurricane, or those who had compromised immune systems, or had already compromised health conditions, those who had heart conditions, diabetes, or something that required care. And they also had medical bills that were piling up. There was funeral costs as well for folks who had died that had to be covered. And so then the other big problem in terms of getting back up online is the communications infrastructure was down, and people would have to go months in some parts of Puerto Rico and not have access to communications infrastructure. There would be parts of the island like 6 months out, they still did not have power. But what Puerto Rico also provided was an opportunity to move from having this ancient, this old type of electricity system, and move into more modern energy infrastructure. And even then, I think you could see there was all these vulture companies that would try to swoop in on the island as well to profit from it. And so I think also a lot of that was something that contributed to these failures that we saw in Puerto Rico. There's some government responses that were beneficial, but I think you can also see in terms of allocations of resources in Florida and Texas and Kansas, there's better responses from the federal government versus in Puerto Rico. I think you see, and I think it is also related to issues of race. And even within Florida, you'll see that where you live will also impact how quickly you will be able to access different types of services. And so then I wanted to move on to another type of natural disaster. This is something that is also ongoing now. And so the ABA has created, disaster legal services for those who have, are impacted by natural disasters. So whether it's going through and assisting on property insurance claims. And FEMA also provides assistance in terms of monetary assistance, but many times it's difficult to navigate and complete the FEMA forms. And there are people who are being assigned by the government to do that. But I think it's also a matter of allocation of resources, because some of the FEMA resources also fall into different intergovernmental interagency issues, and so some of that gets lost. And also there's been slashes in funding in terms of environmental justice projects, and there's also issues of Superfund management. Oh, I have something I want to share with you. Okay. And then another issue that we have is Superfund resources. So this is about 2 years ago, we're having the same type of fires again. And one of the issues that came up is that there's issues of forest debris because people were not raking in the forest. That's what was causing the wildfires. And so when I was in New York, I think my nephew had been born then. And he was born, I think, a few weeks earlier. So I went to go see him in New York. And so when I was coming home from the airport, I picked up a copy of the New York Daily News. And so this is a copy of the headline I was showing somebody. It's like, they wanted to solve the problem by making America rake again. So this was also, I don't know if you can see it, so it says make America rake again. And so this issue was about, President Trump was saying this issue about proper forest management. And what was interesting is that in terms of allocations of financial resources to fight fires, I think you're also seeing some of this, the graphs that you can see here are aerial Google satellite images from Google about how large these firefighters are, and you can see how rapidly they have spread, from this area here. And so I think seeing like kind of how broad these fires are is really something that's dangerous, because earlier the fires were where the fires would occur would be where people didn't live. But because there's been increases in population, it's become more expensive to live in California, like completely unsustainable. So people are starting to move into the areas where they're fire-prone risk areas. And so as a part of this, I think there's also, has been lawsuits that have been brought against PG&E because some of the wildfires were started because of faulty safety mechanisms on some of their power lines and transmission systems. And so I think that having not having proper safety and environmental measures and like the compliance mechanisms as well contributed to that. And also having underfunding in terms of forestry management. A lot of people think, oh, it's the forest, just let it handle itself. But I think that folks also need to understand, like, there's resources that need to be allocated, especially under conditions of climate change. Otherwise, we're going to see these types of continued environmental issues that keep coming up. And one of the things also I would point out is that also in California, you have high instances of urban oil fields. And so if any of you are from Southern California, you may or may not realize that California historically had large oil reserves, both offshore as well as inland. And so like if you looked at pictures of Santa Monica Beach from the 1960s to now, or the 1940s even, it would be very different than what it is now. And what you can see, though, from that is that if there's any type of oil spill or any type of gas leak that happens, there was a very famous one in 2000. the 2017, the Aliso Canyon not oil spill, gas leak. And so everybody that lived in that area had to evacuate, and they were provided shelter. Whereas there's, ongoing methane leaks in urban areas in inner city Los Angeles, East Los Angeles, and the government doesn't provide any type of relief. This is, that's the people came onto the nuisance, but that's the only place where they could afford to live. And so I think that was important to notice that as well. And so the EPA has kind of set out to comply with President Clinton's executive order 12898. And the real push for environmental justice started coming under George H.W. Bush's era. And so historically, environmental justice has been a bipartisan issue. And it's maybe only recently that it's become a partisan issue. But really what executive order 12898 really was sought out to ensure was that the programs that the government funds consider disproportionately high adverse human health and environmental effects on minority and low-income populations. In addition to that, you can also have environmental justice would involve the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And so the US EPA, what it has sought to do as its goal, made this goal for all communities and people across the country. And to really achieve environmental justice would result in the same level of protection from environmental health hazards for all people and equal access to the proper decision-making to have a healthy environment in which to live, work, and learn. And so that bill that was brought forward, the bill that was brought forward for the Environmental Justice Act, and there's been different iterations of it. Senator Cory Booker brought forward a bill in 2017. It was reintroduced in 2019. There's also updates to a new type of bill called the Environmental Justice for All Act. And so all of these issues are working to expand upon rights and protections for communities of colors and impoverished areas. And what they're really seeking to do is to set up requirements for federal agencies to update and provide a strategy and implement it on a yearly basis to address the negative environmental impacts that communities of color face. The measure would also provide provisions for various types of citizen suits. You can also see that President John F. Kennedy was a proponent of environmental justice. He said that simple justice requires that public funds to which all taxpayers of all races contribute not be spent in any fashion which encourages, entrenches, subsidizes, or results in any racial discrimination. So I think it's important to kind of think about these issues and see what is going on behind them. And so I wanted to pause right here and see if you all have any types of questions, or if I can answer any other general questions that you may have.
Okay, if anyone has questions, just hit the little raise your hand icon, and we'll bring you in.
Okay, let me.
Oh, no, go ahead. You can.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to raise my hand. I'm on my cell phone. Anyway, Professor, what happened with the bills that you discussed about the environmental protection for everyone? What happened with the bill, like the bill from Cory Booker and the other ones? Did any of them pass?
Well, Senator Cory Booker's bill, he introduced in 2017, and we actually had a program for it at the American Bar Association to discuss the bill. He gave a really good, speech about it. And I think it was a really urgent issue because it was flowing out of the issues that reemerged in 2014 as a result of the Flint water crisis. And I remember there's like environmental law listserv, and I forwarded information about the bill, and people laughed at me like about the bill. And so because I think this was like in 2017. So the thing is, though, I think that if you want to push for an issue, like even in this type of specific bill, I think you have to to work on those issues, whether it's like good times or bad. And so I think that a part of it is also like the education part of it. When I was doing work with the ABA through this Environmental Justice Committee, it took us about 1.5 years, but we got the president of the American Bar Association at the time, Hillary Bass, to issue a letter of support in favor of the bill, and then we took it also to Capitol Hill to have additional support for the Environmental Justice Act. And then since then, there was the new one that was put forward, Environmental Justice for All Act. And what I think was important is, though, the bill, I think currently, I looked at it maybe a week or two ago, it has a 4% chance of passing. But I think that what was interesting is that even the congressional officials who you would think would be supportive of it were not, because it goes against, in some ways, industry interests. And so even if you have those who you think would be aligned with environmental rights, they would hesitate to support it because it would impact the other constituencies or business interests. So I think a lot of that is a bit of a balancing act, but which is to say, I don't think that it will not pass, but I think that the other strategy was to look at it from the state and local issues. One of the things that we saw is that when he was a representative, Ron DeSantis in the U.S. House, he said that he would actually support the Environmental Justice for Act, like he'd serve as a co-sponsor of it, but we would have to find somebody else to serve as the we would have to find somebody else who was Republican to co-sponsor it. And so the person that we thought would do it, he ended up losing his seat in re-election, and then Ron DeSantis ran for governor. So then that lost support. So I think it's really it's just a matter of finding the right people to support it, but I don't think that it's something that's bygone. And I think it would be a victory because there hasn't been any environmental legislation for over 50 years. The Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, everything that, you study in environmental law, all of that was passed in the late 60s, early 70s. Like with this CERCLA and RCRA regulation that came afterwards, those were more responsive to toxic pollutions and to actually limit the liability that corporations would face. And so, but I wouldn't really consider them environmental laws. They were more or less like hazardous regulations, hazardous regulation law. But I think in terms of environmental justice, it's really not just the issue of the law, but I think it's also an issue of being able to litigate on these issues. The lawsuits that they're working on in amicus briefs with the Center for Earth Jurisprudence, as well as in the Environmental Law Clinic, for those of you who are in them, those lawsuits are more geared specifically on the public trust doctrine. You also see the work that was being done as a result of the Pope's encyclical, calling for the rights of nature, for calling for that. I think CEJ has really been at the forefront of those efforts in terms of being able to file those. And I think when Sister Patricia Siemens, founded the Center for Earth Jurisprudence, it really wasn't a concept that people thought about. And so, many over like 10 years later, when celebrating, the founding of the center, it's really something. It was because when nobody thought it was something that was possible or happening, but they just kept up with the idea that they were able to put forward with it. And so I think like the same way where you have the concept with Earth Jurisprudence, I think the idea of environmental justice is an idea whose time has really come now. And I think that they're starting to see more momentum behind the concept, as well as making sure that laws and rules are in place to strengthen it as well.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll do another call for questions. I do have some from the chat to share if nobody wants to present their question just now. Okay, so I'm gonna share a couple that we had in the chat. So one person wrote that In previous weeks, we talked about the problem with industry and economic interests outweighing nature's rights. So it sounds like they outweigh human rights too. What chance do we have for recognizing nature's rights if we don't even recognize human rights?
Right, and so I think this is a problem that's also being discussed globally in terms of why is this movement where you had the United Nations formed and specific issues of human rights were being overlooked, and I think though. And I think I'm speaking for myself, but I think others would say the same thing as well. Is that the whole movement for human rights has really fallen on its face. In the sense that a lot of international organizations haven't put the priority on in terms of the protections for human rights to go forward. And so as a result of that, you see the highest levels of incarceration and human slavery today than you did at the time of the height of the transatlantic slave trade. Like we have at the United States the highest levels of incarceration than any other industrialized country in the world. And in fact, we're actually going ahead and importing our prison, this idea that we have of mass prison system to other countries as well, because there's business in prison, in the prison system. And then as a result of that, you can also see that this idea of human rights is not given as much interest. At the same time, I think that there are also corporate interests that are invested in the protection of the environment. In Florida, that includes industries like the boating industry, the tourism industry, the fishing industry. And all of these industries combined together will work to protect the environment. In Colorado, it's places, companies like industries like the resorts and ski resorts. And also in California, you will find wine companies that have vineyards that are impacted by climate change, as well, working on climate issues. So I think it's also a business interest as well to protect the environment. So on one hand, I can be crass and say all environmental laws become corporate law, but at the same time, I think it's important to see that the nuance that there are corporate interests that are aligned with protection of the environment just for being able to sustain their business model as it is. So what was the company, if there's an environmental class, this is like, what was the company that when Superstorm Sandy hit New York was most prepared to handle this? I mean, it was a joke in terms of, it became a joke the next day, is that the lights were off all over the city of New York, but they were on in the Goldman Sachs building, because Goldman Sachs, a financial services institution, knows the importance of climate change preparation. And so they had, sandbags fill up all of their front entrance to avoid the flooding. They had protection for their servers. They had created backup generators that provide electricity. They had all these systems and plans in place, not because they really care about climate change or the environment, because from a business sustainability, business continuity perspective, they needed to be able to protect their business model. And so that was really something that was important to consider.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to remind everyone that if you want to verbally ask your question or make your comment, please raise your hand and we will call on you. You can also put it in the chat. In the meantime, I do have a few more questions from the chat that I'll share. But if you have anything to contribute at this point, just hit the little raise hand icon. Unless you're on a mobile device, then just say, hey, I have a question. So someone had, and I think we covered this a little bit under the first question, but they asked why after all this time has the Executive Order 12898 not been effective?
So the reason for its ineffectiveness, and this also started to happen more, not just during George W. Bush's era, but also during President Barack Obama's administration, is that there was a backlog of cases. So even if somebody could file cases and have them go into effect, they just sat there. Like they were not handled. They were not, you know, assigned to anybody to investigate. They just basically sat there. And so at this point now, I think some of those, the best way, I think, also to make something ineffective is to underfund it. And so if it doesn't have a proper funding, it's not going to be able to operate as efficiently as it could and be able to reach its intended goal as well.
Thank you. So somebody had written, so when we were talking about the pandemic earlier, and they asked, are the injustice issues around the pandemic a symptom of environmental degradation, an inherent injustice in our social systems, or both?
So I think that environmental inequities that we see and experience are also related to broader economic inequities. And so for example, with the coronavirus, you won't see everybody facing it and experiencing it the same way. And it's shown that not only is income a factor, but also race is a factor. Because even, I mean, there are studies that were done. So for example, for African American individuals who have, you know, who have grown up who have been raised in areas that have faced toxicity and environmental pollutions, they're going to have suffering air problems related to air pollution and toxicity. And the same thing also applies to the Latino community in terms of the negative health impacts. And so when you have certain populations that are more susceptible and prone to these issues, it will also impact how responsiveness they would be in terms of being able to respond to treatment as well as immunity in terms of fighting off the coronavirus disease. And then they also have to consider the comorbidity factors. And so the same way, like you have comorbidity factors, you have in the environmental justice area, you have like threat multipliers to issues. So whether it's environmental issues, it may be income inequality, it may also be geographic issues, it may be pre-existing health conditions, it may be access to lack of capital, as well as lack of access to finance mechanisms. And so all of that also combines to impact the environmental issues, and seeing that environmental degradation is happening because people want more to accumulate more wealth, to have these issues of wealth maximization. So that's really something that is also happening at the same time. And the other thing I wanted to do, you know, I'll take another question, but I wanted to share with you a short video as well. Did you want to ask another question, and then I can have, actually, Alex, can I send you the video and then you can play it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then actually, yeah, if you send it to me, I'll ask the next question. And as you're answering, I'll get everything loaded up, if that works. Okay, so let's see, where were we? We have a couple more here. Okay, yeah, so someone had asked, we previously discussed the issues that arise when human needs infringe on nature's rights. And I think they're referring to, you know, it came up a couple times in our discussions about, you know, building developments in bear habitats, and then the bears become a nuisance, and how do we deal with that, you know? So they said, how do we balance both human and nature's rights when dealing with decisions like where to put dumps or new developments?
Okay, I have to tell you a bear story. Okay. So I think it was Monday. Yeah, it was Monday. No, it was Tuesday. So this past Tuesday, I remember my kid's nanny, I was in the kitchen, and she was helping like them with the homeschooling, and she says, "Oh, I see there's a bear in your yard." And the next thing she's like, "There's, oh, and your garage door is open." I remember because I went to actually go vote that day. And so like in my head there was like, I just couldn't even say the word right now, but like when I'm like oh no. So then I like went to my garage and I opened the door and I saw the bear standing right about to go into the garage, like right there. So then I didn't know what to do, but so I just go boo, like, you know, it's Halloween time, so you go boo. I said boo like twice really loud, and then the bear ran away, and then I closed my garage door. But otherwise the bear would have been in my trash. Like it was just sitting there waiting to get into that trash. So I think it's really hard to see like where these encroachments of nature and human rights, and the reason why I think I'm starting to see more bear activity is because all of this construction that's happening as well, due to the expansion of this interconnect for like the Orlando Beltway. And so I think that when you have this constant construction that's happening, or Orlando is really, like the suburbs of Orlando have expanded so much because the roads have expanded. So even Volusia County is in many ways, you know, where Daytona Beach and Deltona are, which is about 55 minutes in some cases outside of or Orlando, even more than that. It's still considered a suburb of Orlando just because you can commute from that area. And there's parts of Volusia County that are, you know, wetlands and should not be developed upon. But I think that the interest of the developers, and there's also a constant influx of people into the city. At some point there was, I think, over 1,000 people who are coming to Central Florida, to Florida daily, on a daily basis. People are coming to Florida. And so where are these people going to live? Where are they going to work? And so you see that this desire for development is also leading to more violation of the rights of nature. And so the rights of animals, the rights of trees even are not taken into account. And so you see it was actually really sad for my daughter. And she doesn't like me to tell the story, but she's not here and she's not going to watch the YouTube video. After Hurricane Irma came, like we went outside and we saw there was all this debris. There's even like fallen trees that had fallen down. And so when she walked outside, I was thinking, oh no, there's all this like yard debris. You know, I was looking to see, you know, is the cars damaged, is the roof damaged, like that. But for her, like when she saw the trees falling down, like that was really upsetting for her. And she's like, look, Mama, I think she was about 4 years old. She's like, look, Mama, the trees have fallen. And for her, like having the trees fall down was something very destructive. And so I think like we've really lost the value of having a tree fall down. And seeing like how this tree, like the tree itself, has so much value and purpose as well. Sorry, I have a phone notice here. And I have a phone, I don't know where it is. Anyway, so the value of seeing the trees falling down is really important if you think about it, because one of the best ways that we can fight back against climate change is simply by planting more trees. Because that's really Wangari Maathai had this whole movement in Kenya about planting trees. They completely transformed the whole country, and she moved it on to other parts like surrounding countries in her region. But to see that there's so much value that you as you know, as one person, you can do, and just to plant trees, to go about just planting trees. There's also this movement for guerrilla gardening as well. And so a lot of these different types of issues, and even at the municipal level, with increasing ways to electrify with renewable energy. You know, I think I saw the city of Orlando was moving over to electric fleet buses as well. So this is all something that takes time, and it doesn't have to rely on big pieces of legislation like the Environmental Justice Act to accomplish. So I think another part of that is to also think about the consumerism angle of it, and that what we can do in terms of individual community action. And so the video is a CBS clip that I shared, and it's about the rights of nature case, the Juliana case, and I hope we have some time to watch that. So thank you. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And so I think the reason I wanted to share that, even though that case focuses more on climate change, it was also shows you the possibilities that there are within the law for creating a dramatic change, as Ann Carlson said, but also it shows you the possibilities that also exist in terms of environmental justice space going forward in terms of regulations and rules to improve it. So I wanted to see if you have also questions about the video that we just shared, or questions earlier that you would like us to address.
So we did have one more question in the chat that I want to make sure gets asked,
Okay.
and then yeah, we will open up for more questions. So someone had asked, what kind of economic impact would a carbon tax have on lower income communities?
Okay, so that's a really great question. So, for example, I think the carbon tax is going to be used to fund other renewable projects as well as climate change adaptation projects. And so, one of the things that I have seen happening with respect to the carbon tax, it's become somewhat stagnant. And the reason, though, is I think that it still will go forward, because I think the industry itself has started to see that if they don't want to get if they don't want to have to face like the wrath of a case like Juliana, it's better for them to take the lead on the carbon tax, so it won't be the one that the environmental activists have been pushing for. But they realize that there has been negative impacts done to the environment because of the fossil fuel industry. And so the problem, though, with the carbon tax is that some of those fuel surcharges are not borne equally. So in France, they had like this yellow vest movement that emerged because of these taxes that were placed on gasoline. And so the same way people had to commute long distances to get someplace into the urban areas, they would have to pay more for the fuel, and so it would impact them more. And so this was kind of interesting because you had the Paris Agreement, which is this major climate agreement. It was, heralded, by the president of France and, international leaders. But then there was just growing discontent within France about why all of these taxes would have to be borne disproportionately on the poor. And the same thing would apply for renewable energy projects in Florida. The incentives for some of the renewable energy projects are borne primarily to landowners and not able to be enjoyed and benefited as much by those who are renters. And so there's no incentive as much for landlords or for those who are renting out apartments to move over and switch over to renewables, because then the cost would have to be borne by those who are the tenants. And so I think this is another area where you see the not only the tax credits, but also the taxes that are imposed, but also the incentives being disproportionately applied. And so not everybody is able to benefit. Also creates a number of issues.
Thank you for that. So we do have one final question from the chat, but I just want to do one last call to everyone. If you have any questions or comments on the video, any questions or comments on the presentation today, this is your last chance. Okay, well, I wanted to end with this question. Someone had asked very early on, but I think it's a good question to end with. Are there opportunities for law students to offer help for people currently suffering human rights violations?
So I think there's different NGOs as well. I think that you could volunteer with in terms of doing some pro bono work. And I think the ABA also has different initiatives that you could get involved with. The Florida Bar does as well. But I think a good thing also to do while you're in law school is, because I think it's harder to do it once you're outside of law school, is to do research in certain areas of the law. So I think one of the things you can do, so for example, there's not much written as much about environmental human rights, like environmental issues as they relate to human rights. There's also a lot of work on environmental defenders. So I think that would be an interesting topic to pursue as an upper level writing project while you're in law school, or if you're on the Environmental Earth Law Journal, that's also a possibility for something that you want to explore. And I think also, you know, for those of you who have been doing and been a part of this Ecological Immersion Academy, it also, I think, behoove you, for those who are law students, to also join the Environmental and Earth Law Certificate Program. And really, we've updated it so you're only required to take 10 credits to obtain the certificate. It's kind of exciting because when you graduate, you also receive a plaque as a result of receiving the certificate. And it's also one of the credentials that you can show future employers when you apply for positions. And so you have to take environmental law as well as the this one credit course on environmental earth law, justice, and jurisprudence, which Rachel Deming, Margaret Stewart, and I co-teach. And that course also goes a little bit deeper into some of these issues that we have discussed here today. And then you have to take a skills component, which, you know, you can satisfy through the environmental law clinic or mediations, depositions, other types of clinics. And so I can, you know, share more information about that with you. But I think, you know, you really want to set yourselves up for success in terms of, you know, what you do. And so I think it's important to reach out and seek out pro bono opportunities. But I also think in terms of distinguishing yourself, I think it's important to write about issues and seek out opportunities as well. And I think that's something that you really should kind of take advantage of and do, because it really helps you. So one of my students, Megan Pearson, she had actually applied for and been, you know, received a grant to go travel to be a part of a program that was sponsored by Harvard University's food law program. And so that's, I think, opportunities that you can also seek out as well, and opportunities. And I think some of that, like one of the NGOs that I worked for, I found out about, for the one that I got involved with for the Juliana case, is because I read about those hatch cases, and I emailed Jim Hansen, who's a climate scientist who worked at NASA and was affiliated with, and he was one of the expert witnesses. And so he actually put me in touch with Julia Olson, who you saw on the video there with the with our Children's Trust. And so she then put me in touch with somebody who was working in Boulder on those cases. And so I think also some of it also kind of reaching out to people and networking as well to find out. So if there's something you're going to work on, I think when they were doing that case, they were taking help from law students all across the country to work on that case. And so I think it's just a matter of just reaching out to people and asking them about different opportunities.
Great, thank you so much for that. I'm just going to share a graphic here to end with, just with some contact information on it, and where you can keep up with the center and the things that we've been discussing. Let me just, sorry, little technical difficulty. Okay, got that. Sorry, every time I do something, I lose all my controls. Okay, there we go. All right. So, so thank you so much, Professor Ahmad. I really think that we now have a much better understanding of how these topics that, you know, we have this tendency to silo and then to deal with separately are all very interconnected and interrelated to each other. And over the past few weeks, you know, we've seen what is lacking in our current regulatory environmental law system and have been presented with possible alternatives, you know. So I hope everyone has gained a general understanding of these topics. If you are interested in diving deeper into this subject area, as Professor Ahmad, just explained, remember that you have a very unique opportunity at Berry Law with our environmental and earth law program. So please be on the lookout for the classes that we offer centered on earth law, environmental justice, environmental ethics, all of these things that are very unique. And this combined with your environmental and administrative law classes will equip you with a really well-rounded and comprehensive education on not only the current system, but the possible alternative paradigms. So today's session does conclude our 2020 Ecological Immersion Academy. Over the next few days, the recordings and the materials will be uploaded, and we'll be sending out the links for that. So just, bear with us. It takes a very long time to upload, but we will have that to you shortly. So please be sure to, follow the center on social media, check out our website, and keep a lookout in all the Berry Law communications for upcoming opportunities, both from the center and the environmental and earth law program in general. And then finally, if you have not done so and you are in the United States, please be sure to vote this week. At the end of the day, we're not going to realize these changes or address these issues if we do not have a governing body that reflects the people that they represent. So voting is the first of many, many steps to begin making the cultural and political changes necessary for these alternative legal systems to even be possible. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us, and please join me once again in thanking Professor Ahmad for her expertise with us today. And with that, our academy has now concluded. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.